Amendment. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval defenses or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be put twice or to be twice put in jeopardy of life and or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation.
That's a long
There's a
one.
lot there.
Let's break it down.
Yeah. So, let's start with the grand jury. Technically, when you go to court, you are sitting at a petite jury. Grand means big, petite means little. Grand jury is usually 20-something people. It's generally held that your laws when testifying, or your rights when testifying before a grand jury are different than your rights when testifying in a regular court. There's a lot of other stuff involved. There's a whole Rockford Files episode where he's held in contempt of the grand jury, and it's a thing. Yeah. But if they can't get an indictment by a grand jury, you're not going to trial.
So I was going to ask that the grand jury even goes to a regular jury.
Yeah, grand jury is the group of people who determine whether there's enough evidence to even issue a warrant in the first place.
Have you ever been on a grand jury before?
I've never been on a grand jury, no. Only the petite jury the one time. It's a very different experience. I do know that. For one thing, you don't have a right to counsel on a grand jury. The only people in the grand jury room are the prosecutor, the grand jury, and the witness. And there's a judge, and that's it. There's no audience allowed. There's no defense attorneys allowed. But all they are there to do is determine if there's enough evidence to put someone on trial. You can be arrested before then, but in order to be indicted of the crime, there needs to be a grand jury that hears the case. And we don't see it a lot on crime shows because of the lack of normal courtroom shenaniganery. You're not going to get objections in a grand jury because there's no one in there with the right to object. There's a saying that the grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. I don't know how true that is. And I think it depends a great deal on who you're indicting for what, where.
It says right here, you don't need a grand jury for military cases.
Yeah. When in actual service in time of war or public danger. So, right now, if you are a member of the armed forces and you commit a crime on base, or a specifically military crime, they still have to do grand jury because we are not at war. Courts martial, to pluralize properly, are a whole separate category, and the rules are different. And NCIS is, I think, about the only crime series that routinely deals with the military justice system. It's come up a time or two on Law and Order. In a word that means a great deal if you're a certain age and nothing at all if you're younger than that. There's a Law and Order based on the Tailhook scandal. Perry Mason actually is an attorney in a court-martial on a couple of episodes. So the laws are different, but unless we're actually at war, you still need to have a grand jury for a military case.
Right.
I know that there are cases of, like, deserters being shot on sight during the Civil War. But in time of peace, you know, a member of the military does not have notably fewer rights than the average person. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. This is the double jeopardy clause. Let's start by saying the double jeopardy movie has nothing to do with the actual double jeopardy. She absolutely could have been arrested, tried, and convicted for killing her husband when she had already been convicted when he faked his death. It's not the same case if it happens at different times.
No, it has nothing to do with the game show.
And nothing to do with game show. No. That's just clever wordplay. No, real double jeopardy is, let's say that you are arrested for knocking over a convenience store. And regardless of your guilt or innocence here, you are put on trial and you are found not guilty. It doesn't matter what evidence they find after that point. You cannot be arrested and tried for that specific same crime of knocking over that convenience store again. Now, if there are other crimes that are committed in the process of that crime, let's say you then stole a car to be your getaway vehicle from the convenience store robbery, and they didn't charge you with it the first time, they could absolutely charge you with stealing that car. However, you are legally considered to be not guilty of the crime of knocking over the convenience store, whether you did it or not, and you can never be tried again.
Unless you knock over the convenience store again.
Right. If you knock over the convenience store a second time, whether you've been convicted or not, doesn't matter. You know, let's say, we'll go back to the movie example, let's say that you are found innocent, or you were found guilty of knocking over that convenience store, even though you didn't do it. That does not give you the right to go knock over that convenience store because you've already served time for having done so. That would be silly. But you may be thinking, well, okay, but there are clear examples of people who have gone on trial for the exact same offense more than once. And the issue there is what crime, and sometimes it's criminal versus civil. Like, let's give the big example of O.J. Simpson, who was found not guilty of killing his wife and a friend of hers in a court of law. Miscarriage of justice, don't even get me started. But the families of the victims then took him to civil court. I forget exactly what they got him with. I'm going to look that up real quick because it is, you know, murder trial of O.J. Simpson. There we go.
So real fast. So even if he said afterwards, he said, I did do it, they can't, it's too late.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I read the book because the library had it, and I said, okay, fine. So I read his book, If I Did It. And I have the fairly interesting theory that he wrote the book to be absolutely entirely not what happened, because then people would think he was not guilty. Let's see. Civil trial. There we go. Yeah, wrongful death. They sued him for wrongful death in civil court. And part of it was the standards of evidence are different in civil and criminal court. In civil court, it's preponderance of evidence. In criminal court, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to be a lot more sure in a criminal case than in a civil case. You can go with probably in a civil case, and you absolutely cannot in a criminal case. You have to be sure in a criminal case. Reasonable is doing a lot of work there, because you can have the kind of like, well, I don't know, it could have been aliens. That's not a reasonable doubt, kids. But the way they presented evidence was different. It was a whole other thing. But O.J. Simpson was found liable in a civil court of causing the wrongful death of the victims. So it's two different cases. And in civil court, he wasn't going to go to jail, but they were able to
Get the money,
or at least try. That was a whole other thing, and he hid assets in a big deal. And they got the rights to the book when he got the book contract. And I don't know if you've ever seen the cover of If I Did It. The word if is very, very, very small on that book cover. And it mostly just says, I did it, by O.J. Simpson. Because the Goldman family got to design the book cover.
Speaking of civil cases, that would be like the Alex Jones civil case.
Yeah. He is being sued for defamation of character and just this whole list of, you can't just say whatever comes to your mind and damage people's lives, which is what he's been doing. And so
going back, that wasn't in his First Amendment right to do.
Yeah, he doesn't have a First Amendment right to sick his followers on grieving parents. It turns out you can't do that without consequences.
I heard he was trying to countersue them.
Yeah, he is, because he's a garbage human being.
I don't know if that's working or not.
No, it's not. And sadly, the judge has rejected the Onion's bid to buy InfoWars, and so that's another thing that's going on, and yeah. But another prominent double jeopardy case of my formative years is the Rodney King case. Because the cops were acquitted. 4 of the cops went on trial for beating Rodney King, despite video evidence of beating the man nearly to death.
I remember that in the early 90s.
No, I was living in Los Angeles County at the time. I actually got days off school my freshman year in high school because it was the day the verdict came, the days after the verdict came out.
The riots happened.
Riots happened.
And the truck driver incident.
Reginald Denny got beaten nearly to death at an intersection, and it was also on camera. big deal happening in LA at the time. And honestly, I consider LA to be overdue by about a decade for a major riot, because LA has major riots about every 20 or 30 years.
I went to, off topic, but I went to LA in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
I went to see Boy Meets World.
Yeah, I grew up down there. So a lot of my formative experiences are Los Angeles based. And the thing is the cops were acquitted of beating Rodney King. Which, surely there was no racism involved in that. Also our weird sense that cops get passes that people shouldn't, and no, it's, yeah.
Go back to the 2020 riots of the George Floyd incident.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing is I know of 4 major riots in LA history, and all of them have had racial aspects. Rodney King suffered 11 skull fractures, permanent brain damage, broken bones and teeth, kidney failure, and of course, trauma from being beaten half to death. Broken right ankle. I mean, the man was messed up.
And on camera, too.
And on camera. And 4 cops were arrested, and 4 cops were acquitted. And the Department of Justice then went after those cops for a violation of Rodney King's civil rights.
Did they get that court case done, or that also?
They were, 2 of them were convicted, 2 of them were actually acquitted, but but they lost their jobs. LAPD actually doing something right for once. And part of it is police policy in the US is insane. But violation of his civil rights was a federal case, and it was not the same as the beating. So it was not double jeopardy.
Next, I think what everyone knows all the time says, I plead the fifth.
I plead the fifth. Nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. You don't have to talk. All you have to say is, I refuse to testify on the grounds that I might incriminate myself. I plead the fifth. And legally, they're not even allowed to take that as proof of guilt. You saying, I refuse to talk, is not, constitutionally speaking, proof of guilt. Now, there are limits on your rights here. You can be held in contempt of court in certain situations for refusing to testify. This gets into I am not a lawyer territory. But the one thing I will say for absolute certainty is that's not a universal. Broadly speaking, you don't have to testify, and you can say, I refuse to testify, and they have to back the hell off.
So can you listen to the oligarchy of your house? Can your kids have that right to not to say anything? It's the Sandy or Zane. Like,
yeah, they can, but it's not going to do them any good because, and they don't in practice. Actually, when Zane was little, he used to tell on himself. It was really cute. He, if he came in and said, I'm not supposed to do such and such, that's because he'd just done it, and we all knew it. I'm not supposed to get into a fight at school meant that I was going to be having a talk with his teacher. I'm not supposed to eat all the cookies meant that I had no cookies left. But, when you see people pleading the fifth, that's what that means. It means that they are saying, I don't have to testify against myself. Because if you did, what's even the point? This was still, in some countries, in the days of the use of torture to compel confessions, which absolutely is a part of U.S. legal history. Like, people can argue that all they want, but even under the Constitution, there have been absolute cases of torture to compel confession. It's not as we're going to beat you with rubber hoses so the injuries don't show as it has been in the past, but depriving people of the right to go to the bathroom, depriving people of sleep, depriving people of food and water, those are all methods of torture, and those are still getting used. A lot of police interrogation techniques are, in my not a lawyer opinion, violation of the Fifth Amendment.
Right. That's the next part. It says deprive of life, liberty, or property without due process.
Oh yeah, we violate that one too. Civil forfeiture is, I believe, the term for it. And, yes, unconstitutional, in my not a lawyer opinion. But if your property is seized in the belief that it was part of the commission of a crime, you're SOL.
Right. So, let's say it's the private property be taken for public use without compensation. Is that talking about the God, I mentioned his name. I forgot. Alex Jones stuff was taken.
Yeah. No, his stuff was being seized because he can't pay the fine that was levied on him. So his stuff is considered payment of his fine. It's not quite the same thing, but civil forfeiture is more if you're using your car to smuggle drugs, then the cops are considered to have the right to seize your car. There is a case of a man named Mandrell Stewart, and he got arrested for driving while black, pretty much. And they took over $17,000 in cash off him that he had earned through a restaurant. Like, that was legally his money, but his money was seized because they assumed it had to do with drug smuggling. A lot of people have had money seized. And the cops said, well, it's drug smuggling. They, there was an armored car case where a guy's money was in an armored car, but so was some money used in a crime, so he had to wait until after the crime was resolved to get his money back. And people will seize real estate, or the cops will seize real estate and cars and all kinds of things, and it's been getting more and more extreme over recent years, where cops will violate your Fifth Amendment rights.
Sorry.
In my state, the prosecutors have to prove by preponderance of evidence that the property is connected to a crime. You need to prove your own innocence, and 90% of the proceeds are going to go to law enforcement. So that's not good. In your state, clear and convincing evidence, which I believe is a higher standard. You need to prove your own evidence unless the stuff seized is valued at more than $15,000, in which case the government has to prove that you're guilty. And 100% of the proceeds go to law enforcement, 90% for juvenile cases.
So, is there any cases that you know the Supreme Court that affected that was about this amendment?
So the Supreme Court is usually upheld civil forfeiture. There's a case called United States versus 43 Gallons of Whiskey, which is one of my favorite Supreme Court case names. It's from 1872. And he took a man named Bernard Lariviere, I believe, took unlicensed whiskey to an Indian village to trade with the Native Americans under the belief that the land was Chippewa and the government didn't have jurisdiction. And the whiskey was seized. And it was found to be legal to seize his whiskey, which was the actual crime. So in that case, okay. But, you know, in civil forfeiture, the owner has to prove innocence in order to get their stuff back, which is backwards. Austin versus United States, it's subject to excessive fines clause. So, you know, they can't seize your car for a traffic stop. Like, if you run a stop sign, they can't take your car for that. That's an unreasonable fine. But, you know, there are a lot of people who really want to reform civil forfeiture because it's overboard. And because it is, you know, it's actually a bipartisan issue right now because the ACLU and the Koch family are both opposed to civil forfeiture. Cops are now classifying these things as evidence, which means they can keep them, make it really hard for you to get them back, and sell them after 120 days. It's very clear that this is being used primarily against minorities. It's a big, big issue, and a lot of people are making a big deal about it. New Mexico has outlawed civil forfeiture, which is presumably why a lot of stuff is being classed as evidence in New Mexico now. So that is our current Fifth Amendment battleground. You know, not indictments, not testifying against yourself. It's the deprived of life, liberty, or property that is where we're currently at odds in this country. Yeah. Likewise, the final clause of the Fifth Amendment, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. And that is what is called eminent domain. Now, in theory, the government can't just take my house. However, if they decide there needs to be a road running through my property, and honestly, there would be good reason to run a road through, at the very least, my neighbor's property. You know, if they decide there needs to be a road through Mr. Marvin's yard, in theory, the government can seize Mr. Marvin's land as long as they pay him a reasonable price. And he does not have the right to do anything about it.
That'd be just compensation. So they didn't pay him a reasonable price, then that would.
Yeah. In theory, they could seize part of his land to connect my cul-de-sac to the main road on the other side of his property. Honestly, it would make our neighborhood a lot more busy, but it would make a lot of sense to do it. My neighborhood is a maze. It's ridiculous. People get lost coming to my house all the time. I don't think they're going to do it. I'm just saying, this is actually a real-world example near my house. If they seize part of his land to put a road through, that is eminent domain, and that is legal under the Fifth Amendment. But if they just want to take his property, they can't. They have to prove that there is a reason for the public good to do it. This is another one that gets a little bit iffy at times. Sometimes what the government considers to be the general good is not as general good as we would like. And again, that's more of a legal question than a me question here. But the issue was you couldn't say seize somebody's land just because you wanted it. Which was, yes, a problem in England at the time. Now, we don't have...
Or unless they're Native Americans, then...
Native Americans aren't counted under the Constitution at the point at which the Bill of Rights was written. So, there's certainly that. Though, I believe that Fifth Amendment is what was used in the Supreme Court case that made the Trail of Tears illegal. But I don't know. I would have to go look that up. Because that is private property being taken. But, in the UK, the bigger issue was lords declaring that property was theirs because it had theoretically belonged to their family and now it was going to be part of their estate and an entire village had to move.
Yeah, the feudalism fun, who really
it lasted well beyond feudalism.
And it was like who really owned that land? Like the Lord's like, I don't know the king. Duke's like, I own it. No, the Earl's like, no, I own it. The King's like, no, I own it all.
Yeah, there's an episode of Time Team where they're excavating a village that was forced to move because a lord decided they didn't want a village on that part of their property. An entire village. So that's really where this part of the Fifth Amendment comes from, is people wanted to, know that if they bought land, it was their land. And the government couldn't just decide it wasn't.
Of course, now most land's the bank's land at this point.
Yeah, well.
The new lords, the bank. Yeah, speaking of selling land, owning land, did you hear? I don't know if I talked about it or not, about how all the big boys are dying now because of land issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot of land around here. I don't actually know who it belongs to. It could be the state. It could be the federal government. It's probably the military. A
Okay.
lot of the vacant land around here is actually Lewis McCord.
I was thinking that a few years ago, like 10 or so years ago, give or take, there's a thing of my dad's family's land. You know how
Mhm.
they didn't technically own the land anymore, but they still own the mineral rights to the land.
Yeah, there's a Perry Mason that gets resolved because a guy owned the land but not the mineral rights, which is another thing that it's a thing, and I know it's a thing, but I don't understand it enough to be intelligent about it. But sometimes you can own your land but not the mineral rights on your land,
Or vice versa.
or vice versa. Yeah.
And
Um,
so yeah, apparently we own the mineral rights to that land of all this coal and stuff, or a big coal land in Kentucky. But
huh.
at this point, there's no point to it because there's so much family division that like each share isn't worth that much really
Yeah.
after so many generations and like 20 grandkids and great grandkids. Like it's
Yeah. Yeah, this was a case where they were able to find, they were able to prove that a guy had buried his wife and her possibly lover on his land by Perry getting a lease on the mineral rights and claiming he was looking for uranium. It's like, okay, guys, start digging. And the owner of the land who had killed his wife was like, wait, what? What's happening? Like, well, I leased the mineral rights, and I'm going to dig on your land purely to look for uranium, not to look for corpses. And the guy confessed, because it's Perry Mason.
So again, like your thing, but you don't have to give a payment to you take your kids' stuff.
No. And actually, at Halloween, we have what we call the parent tax, which is I go through their candy and take some of their candy. That they consider it unreasonable search and seizure, but I consider it for the public use. And their compensation is that I love them.